So Esteban, this debt for climate thing, this sounds like a really exciting way to break through the political impasse which we're stuck in.
Yeah, I think it's about time that we connect social justice and climate
Mm.
justice. And this is something that the climate movement in Europe has been trying to do for a long time, connect to the workers. But I think we have failed to do that yet.
Mm.
And I think we may have found a way. Maybe it's not the only way,
Mm.
but it's a way where we can connect labor and climate justice.
Mm. Because in this country, at any rate, we've been very successfully divided. You know, we've been set against each other. These Greens are coming to take away your livelihood. That's the approach which has been taken, and it's quite hard to argue against when people are so in such a state of insecurity in this country that they could lose their job at any time because the labour rights have been taken away. They've got massive debts hanging over them because even with one job, two jobs, three jobs, you can't afford to pay your bills anymore. The price of housing is ridiculous, and so somehow we have to stop governments from holding us apart like that. And you perhaps have found the formula for that.
Yeah, Argentina, where I come from, has the biggest loan in the history of the world with the IMF, and debt in the global south we have found is the common denominator behind the advancing of fracking and drilling and mining. And by connecting debt and climate, we've been able to build a coalition so broad of labor movements, social movements, and climate movements that are targeting the G7 this summer. And we are demanding the cancellation of the debts of the global south to take climate action and use those funds to keep the fossil fuels in the ground. So we're connecting that way all the demands of the workers. And I know it may not be applicable yet to the global north so easily, but imagine when the global south labor unions are mobilizing, sooner or later the periphery of Europe will join as well.
Yeah.
And this is something that everyone has something to gain. The global south, by liberating itself from this burden of debt that keeps us, is a knee on the neck of the global south that forces the expansion of the fossil fuel industry. And the global north has something to gain by taking climate action. And actually, the global south has trillions of dollars of fossil fuels in the ground and trillions of dollars of debt. Imagine that we could cancel those off.
Yeah.
And this could be the biggest victory to date in the climate fight.
So this is a way of leaving fossil fuels in the ground on a massive scale. You say, we, Argentina and other nations, commit to leave these fossil fuels in the ground if you, the rich nations, commit to cancelling our debt.
Yes, and it's part of a larger framework where, the global north has a climate debt with the global south. They are by far the largest emitter of greenhouse gases. They continue to destroy the planet with their multinational companies. And this is a way to start getting them to pay their climate debt. But the climate debt also involves reparations, loss and damage, the climate finance that they committed to in the Paris Agreement, $100 billion a year that they have to provide to the global south. But they shouldn't provide that as loans. They should provide that as interest-free payments. The Debt for Climate campaign at the core is what you just said, but also brings together all of these demands from Africa, Latin America, to make the global north hold them accountable for their climate debt, but start to make them take action by canceling the debts of the global south for climate action.
I think there's a brilliant symmetry in this, but I also think that it reminds us of issues that we've kind of forgotten in countries like the UK, where 20 years ago we were very aware of these illegitimate debts, and somehow it's just slipped right off the agenda. So this has got the potential to bring this massive hidden issue back up into public consciousness, but at the same time to actually catalyse action in a way that we desperately need.
Yeah, I think the system is working hard at depoliticizing us. And I think what we are trying to do is building an alternative where we could politicize the climate activists that barely know anything about, some of them don't even know about what the IMF or World Bank mean, or G7. Politicize the climate movement about the financial powers behind the fossil fuel industry, and politicize at the same time the labor unions about climate. And the connection between these two such different worlds is debt for climate. That's the bridge that we found.
This is going to put a chill down the spine of governments everywhere.
I'm sure they'll come after us sooner or later.
But it's great. It's great. It's just what we need.
And we are starting at the G7, which is on June 26th, but it's not the end, but the beginning. We have a long-term vision, so we have to put this in the agenda of COP.
Yeah.
We're going to do another global action during COP27 in Egypt. And Egypt, by the way, is a great example of both. It's one of the most indebted countries in the world, and is one of the most affected by the climate crisis. They only have one source of water, which is going down, the Nile.
Yeah.
So it's a great example of the need for debt for climate.
Yeah.
And we need to keep building. It's not going to be an immediate, connection that all the labor and all the climate movements coming together at once. It's a slow process. They belong in very different cultures and worlds, but already the magic is happening. When we have some of the biggest labor unions in Argentina, together with XR, Fridays for Future, in a call, and you can see the magic that these groups don't belong together usually. They're never together, but they are coming together, and they both understand the need and the importance of this historic moment to work together for debt for climate.
Fantastic. And how many countries already have a Debt for Climate coalition?
We have more than 25, and we still have a month to go, so we're still onboarding and inviting people.
Brilliant. Yeah, I can really see this taking off. I think it's a thrilling idea, and we have been waiting for an idea like this, to be honest, because we have been so successfully divided, and people have been sort of locked off in their little silos where my concern is the cost of living crisis, my concern is climate, and of course, unless you bring them together, you're never going to create a big enough movement.
One of our comrades in South Africa always tells the people in Europe in our calls, your privileges, don't let them be a burden. They are a weapon. Use your privileges. Here in Europe, because of the proximity to power, because of the influence that you could have when you are arrested without getting murdered or tortured like it happens in the Global South, imagine that we could put those privileges at the service of the people who are dying and at the service of yourselves, because in the end this could benefit the whole world. And I think there's a lot of talk coming up in the climate movements about anti-colonialism, and these things are beginning to become more and more mainstream, at least in the climate movement. But at the same time, there is still a very top-down approach where Europe is setting the agenda of the world climate movement. And the exception with this is that this is coming from the Global South, led by the Global South and the grassroots. And that also gives the moral authority, I think, to help unite the Global North, because the movements here are very divided, and it's really hard to bring them together. But we've already been successful in bringing together movements that don't normally work together. When you put the Global South and the people who are dying first, the frontliners first. And I think in that sense, the Global South has just as much to offer to the Global North as the Global North to us. It's not like Europe will save us, We're going to save each other, and we're going to save the planet only if we can come together.
Well, this is all music to my ears, and I think it's exactly where it needs to go. As you say, we in the North have to accept the leadership of the Global South, because that is where the moral authority lies. Climate justice has to be at the heart of any climate campaign, and in fact, I felt I saw a very hopeful sign in Glasgow at the COP26 summit, because obviously not in the conference centre, which was just a disaster, but in the streets outside, there was a very strong sense that the leadership is now coming from the Global South. The people we're listening to, the people who are making the moves here, are the people from the Global South. We recognise their moral authority. We recognise that something has shifted here, and I don't think I was the only one to really feel that and feel, well, this is a very exciting moment.
And in Europe also, there's, the climate movement is criticized, among other things, for being very white and privileged, middle class, and that's a way that is disconnected in a way from the working class and the lower classes. And I think it's a general symptom of the world that the climate movement's agenda right now is being set by a relatively small group of well-intended activists that are progressive, that are a small percentage of the population. And what we need to do, the climate crisis by far will affect disproportionately the Global South and the working classes. And those people are not yet at the table to negotiate and decide their own future on what their own Green New Deal should look like. And with Debt for Climate, we're building the foundation in each country in a decentralized way, where the power can be built from the bottom up and the grassroots, where those groups, the labor, the climate, and the social movements could come together at the table to decide by themselves, not by someone in Germany or England or whatever in Europe, to tell them how they should get out of the climate crisis themselves, but for them to build that power autonomously. And we in the Global North, the global campaign, support and amplify that by hitting the centers of power, hitting the IMF in Washington, D.C., in Brussels, in Germany at the G7, and really amplify and visibilize the struggles that are usually invisible from our countries.
Exactly. And it's so great to bring in these power structures back into the frame. I mean, so years ago, I wrote a book which was published in 2003, talking about the gross unfairness of global governance, about how we have the IMF, the World Bank, the World Trade Organization, these other institutions which bear no relation to the people at all. It's photocopy democracy, that they get their power from governments which might have got their power from the people, but there's no direct link. There's nobody holding these organizations to account from the grassroots. And that we need to democratize global governance, and I've put forward various proposals for how we can create a sort of people's global governance. And I would love to see those issues come back into the frame and people start talking about it again, because we've been asleep for the past 20 years. I mean, not you, obviously, but in countries like the UK, we've just sort of drifted into this passive acceptance of the global order. I mean, yeah, we've got enough domestic troubles with our total shit show of a government, but globally, none of that has changed. And we've got this order which is controlled by very few countries, not even for the benefit of their own citizens, but for the benefit of their corporate elites, and imposed on the rest of the world. And none of that has gone away. It's all still there. And as you've been telling me, it's probably even worse than it was 20 years ago.
And you know what I think is a key? We say in Argentina, appetite comes as you eat. You're not hungry, but you start eating and you start getting hungry. And sometimes the European approach is, we write a good report, we write a good book, we write a good article, we define the crisis, but nothing happened. Because appetite comes as you eat. We need to build this from the bottom up. And the thing we just need to get people on the streets. And this will build itself as it goes. It will need the guidance and direction of the reports, the books, and all the good material that is being produced very well in Europe. But it's not enough unless you complement that with mass mobilization on the streets. And then the two can meet together, because neither one can get anywhere with a good direction or without massive popular power on the streets to build the political pressure we need. That's what's missing, because everyone seems to be focused on writing a good book or whatever, but we need to focus on how do we build a mass movement on the streets that can be the counterpart to the really great research that is being done.
Yeah.